I'm David Brazeal, and this is App-titude. More and more I find myself in the car instead of listening to the radio. I turn on a podcast on my podcast player on my phone, and there are a lot of different podcast players, and of course most phones come with a podcast player, but there are a couple of apps that I like to use for iOS that give certain benefits when I'm listening to podcasts in different ways, and I use both of them, so I thought I would talk about both of them here today. The first one is called Overcast, and one thing I love about Overcast is that it lets you share different parts of a podcast. Let's say I'm listening to Retronauts, which is a podcast about old video games, and I want to share this episode about the old ColecoVision video game system. I just tap the share button there, and it gives me the option to share the entire episode with a friend. Let's say I've got a friend who I think would like to listen to the entire episode. I can do that, or I can tap share at the current time. And what that does is if I've got a snippet that is especially interesting, or let's say the podcast is an hour long, but there's a 3-minute discussion that I think my friend will be interested in, I can just tap share at the current time, and it will send a link, generate a link that will jump them directly to that spot in the podcast. Another thing I really love about Overcast is that they use a feature called Smart Speed. A lot of podcast players let you speed up podcasts so you can get through it in 1.5 times or even 2 times, 3 times the speed. But a lot of times that sounds kind of like a chipmunk, or it speeds it up too much. It just doesn't sound natural. Smart Speed, the developer has done just a great job of allowing the speeding up process to happen more naturally. It's some kind of algorithm he's using just allows you to really speed it up and still make it very listenable. So a lot of times if I've got a long podcast that I want to power through, I'll load it up in Overcast and go to Smart Speed, speed it up, and it's just very easy to listen much faster and get through a lot more material. Another thing you can do is you can set different options for different podcasts. So let's say I want to listen to Retronauts at 2 times speed because the people on that podcast talk slow for some reason. I can set that as a custom setting for this particular podcast. Then I go to another podcast where the podcaster is talking fast all the time. I don't want to speed it up so much. I set the speed differently for that podcast. The other podcast app that I listen to and I use more and more as I have added more podcasts and more shows to my list is an app called Castro. And Castro really excels in one area, and that is that it lets you subscribe to a ton of different podcasts. You don't necessarily want to listen to every episode of them, but you do want to see the episodes as they come into your feed. It lets you quickly triage those podcasts and move them in different order and get them then into an inbox where you can listen to them without thinking about it. So I've got a lot of podcasts that I subscribe to, but I don't necessarily want to listen to every episode. I go into the inbox, which is where everything shows up, and I can either start playing it directly from the inbox here. I can add it to my queue at the top of the queue. I can add it to the queue at the bottom of the queue, or I can just archive it if it's something that I don't want to listen to. So whenever I go to my queue, I then have the 3 things that I want to listen to right now. For example, when that empties out, I might go back into my inbox. I might have another list of 10 podcasts that have come in since the last time I went through it, and I can quickly decide, yes, I want to listen to this. No, I don't want to listen to that. I archive the ones I don't want to see anymore, and then I can easily reorder as I go in back to the inbox. You can see I can just tap and hold and reorder the podcasts in the direction and to the place that I want them to play. So that's Castro. Castro costs $3.99 in the iOS App Store, and it's available only for iOS. So is Overcast. It is available only for iOS. It's free. It does have some additional options that you can add for $9.99 a year if you want to support the development of that app. But I use the free version, and I've had no limits really with it. It does everything that I want it to do. Overcast and Castro, 2 great apps for getting more out of your podcasts.